Everyone, greetings from Thai Kerala, and welcome to the third day of ThaiCon 2020. This session is going to be a mentoring masterclass specifically focused on product innovation and diversification. Towards this, to address your concerns, to educate you in this particular space, we have a very eminent person, recognized world over, with us. And before going into that, I would like to speak a little bit about product innovation and diversification. A name in particular which comes to my mind is of a person who was born in the year 1969 in China, who grew up, who had spent his younger days in China, who had to travel 10 hours to meet his 10 hours by train to meet his girlfriend while he was in China. Someone who migrated to the US in 1997. His application was rejected 8 times before on requesting for migration. But in the 8th time, he succeeded and migrated to US. Worked in a small company called WebEx, a startup, which got eventually acquired by a company called Cisco, and heading the Cisco WebEx division for some time. And after some time, sort of not happy with the focus that was given to WebEx by Cisco, resigned and formed his own company in 2011 and went on to become a household name in 2020. Last 9 years, last 9 months, he has become a name, or his company has become something that is synonymous with video conferencing. Today, thanks to his company, thanks to him, Eric Yuan, founder and CEO of Zoom, we are having ThaiCon virtually, thanks to him. And there were times between 2011 and 2020 where he was repeatedly seeing challenging times, because for some reason what he wanted was not becoming a reality. But thanks to COVID, his idea got accepted. And probably one thing that we should admire in him is the conviction that he had about his product, conviction and focus that he had about this product, and the importance he gave to product innovation. He perfected his product so much that when COVID came, none of the other big names, be it Microsoft, be it Google, be it Facebook, none had a capable video conferencing platform. In spite of the product not getting accepted much, his conviction and focus on creating a perfect product would be remembered for generations to come. And product innovation, probably he is the best example that anyone can think of. In spite of not getting traction, he focused with conviction and perfected the product. And again, speaking about diversification, I still remember reading somewhere years back, recipe for disaster is consolidation of power and diversification to unrelated areas. But speaking about related diversification, if we look at three big names who had deep pockets, tons of money, if you take Microsoft, Google, and Facebook, in spite of knowing very well that this is something that would be needed in the days to come, they didn't take it seriously. And that is where the importance of diversification in advance, especially to related areas, is important. And to speak about all this today, we have with us Mr. R. Subramania Iyer, who's called as Subra. In fact, one of the challenges when we faced organizing Capital Cafe was helping these young entrepreneurs pivot. Because last 3 years, we have been organizing Capital Cafe. I still have a list of entrepreneurs which we have shortlisted in the last 2 years, 2018 and 2019, who have still not got funded. For them, pivoting or identifying a new business model is important. And that I believe is the biggest significance. And that is the reason why I'm very happy to be here today. Because Mr. R. Subramaniam Iyer is a specialist in this area, product innovation and diversification. Speaking about Mr. R. Subramaniam, uh, fondly called as Subra. Subra is a forensic accountant, independent director, venture advisor, strategy consultant, focusing on business models, and an expert witness with over 30 years of work experience in Asia and Australia and transactions experience in Asia, the United States, and Europe. Subra is a co-president of Keiretsu Forum Singapore and Chennai. Keiretsu Forum is the largest angel network in the world with 55 chapters and over 2,500 accredited investors. Over the last decade, Subra has played a missionary role in guiding and assisting CEOs of small companies in South India and Singapore through critical growth strategy stages. Subra has frequently conducted free workshops to educate entrepreneurs on new ways of thinking about their business model and work towards building an angel investment ecosystem. Subra has also uh, angel invested in about 20 startups in India, Singapore, and United States. He provides mentoring to some of them in his area of expertise. Subra has co-promoted a business in the medical simulator space in Singapore and has been invested to co-promote an electric vehicle venture in South India. Subra qualified with bachelor's in accountancy honors from National University Singapore and thereafter with the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Australia, which is now known as Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. He is thus a member of CANS, a practicing member during the 10 years that he was partner with PwC Singapore, of the Institute of Singapore Chartered Accountants, a life fellow of the Insolvency Practitioners Association Singapore, and a member of INSOL International. Since 31st December 2020, he has also been designated ISCA Financial Forensic Professional. He also completed the General Management Program at Harvard Business School in fall of 2007 and is an alumnus of that school. He also completed the program at the Singapore International Arbitration Academy jointly organized by NUS and Center for International Law in late 2013. Subra is a person who shuttles between Chennai and Singapore. speaking to Subra yesterday, day before, one thing he said was he has prepared a presentation, and what he mentioned was he wants to spend only half the time with the presentation. This is actually a 1.5 hour session. The time is till 11:30. Rest of the time he wants to answer your questions and concerns. So I'm sure a lot of young aspiring entrepreneurs would be here for the session, and I'm sure our Capital Cafe teams also would be there. Shortlisted entrepreneurs also would be there. So what I'm saying is, you can uh, ask questions using the chat board, and so that during the presentation itself, whatever is coming to your mind, you can start using the chat board. So he'll be ready with the answers. So over to you, Mr. Subra, and thank you very much for sparing your valuable time for Thai Kerala and Thai God. Welcome.
Thank you, Roshan. I hope I'm clear and audible.
Yes.
Right. So I'm going to start with a video before I get to my presentation, because I find that something like that actually warms up participants in a way that nothing else can. So I will just share the video. And if you have seen it before, I apologize.
I'm really excited to share with you some findings that really surprised me about what makes companies succeed the most, what factors actually matter the most for startup success. I believe that the startup organization is one of the greatest forms to make the world a better place. If you take a group of people with the right equity incentives and organize them in a startup, you can unlock human potential in a way never before possible. You get them to achieve unbelievable things. But if the startup organization is so great, why do so many fail? That's what I wanted to find out. I wanted to find out what actually matters most for startup success. And I wanted to try to be systematic about it, avoid some of my instincts and maybe misperceptions I have from so many companies I've seen over the years. I wanted to know this because I've been starting businesses since I was 12 years old, when I sold candy at the bus stop in junior high school, to high school when I made solar energy devices, to college when I made loudspeakers. When I graduated from college, started software companies. And 20 years ago, I started Idea Lab. And in the last 20 years, we started more than 100 companies, many successes and many big failures. We learned a lot from those failures. So I tried to look across what factors accounted the most for company success and failure. So I looked at these 5. First, the idea. I used to think that the idea was everything. I named my company Idea Lab, and how much I worship the aha moment when you first come up with the idea. But then over time, I came to think that maybe the team, the execution, adaptability, that mattered even more than the idea. I never thought I'd be quoting boxer Mike Tyson on the TED stage, but he once said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think that's so true about business as well. So much about a team's execution is its ability to adapt to getting punched in the face by the customer. The customer is the true reality. And that's why I came to think that the team maybe was the most important thing. Then I started looking at the business model. Does the company have a very clear path generating customer revenues? That started rising to the top in my thinking about maybe what mattered most for success. Then I looked at the funding. Sometimes companies received intense amount of funding. Maybe that's the most important thing. And then of course the timing. Is the idea way too early and the world's not ready for it? Is it early, meaning you're in advance and you have to educate the world? Is it just right, or is it too late and there's already too many competitors? So I tried to look very carefully at these 5 factors across many companies. And I looked across all 100 Idea Lab companies and 100 non-Idea Lab companies to try and come up with something scientific about it. So first, on these Idea Lab companies, the top 5 companies, City Search, Cars Direct, GoTo, NetZero, Tickets.com, those all became billion-dollar successes. And the 5 companies on the bottom, Z.com, Insider Pages, My Life, Desktop Factory, People Inc., we all had high hopes for, but didn't succeed. So I tried to rank across all of those attributes how I felt those companies scored on each of those dimensions. And then for non-Idea Lab companies, I looked at wild successes like Airbnb and Instagram and Uber and YouTube and LinkedIn, and some failures. Webvan, Cosmo, Pets.com, Flues, and Friendster. The bottom companies had intense funding. They even had business models in some cases, but they didn't succeed. I tried to look at what factors actually counted the most for success and failure across all these companies, and the results really surprised me. The number one thing was timing. Timing accounted for 42% of the difference between success and failure. Team and execution came in second, and the idea, the differentiability of the idea, the unique idea, that actually came in third. Now, this isn't absolutely definitive. It's not to say that the idea isn't important, but it very much surprised me that the idea wasn't the most important thing. Sometimes it mattered more when it was actually timed. The last two, business model and funding, made sense to me, actually. I think business model makes sense to be that low because you can start out without a business model and then add one later if your customers are demanding what you're creating. And funding, I think as well. If you're underfunded at first, but you're gaining traction, especially in today's age, it's very, very easy to get intense funding. So now let me give you some specific examples about each of these. So take a wild success like Airbnb, everybody knows about. Well, that company was famously passed on by many smart investors because people thought, no one's going to rent out a space in their home to a stranger. Of course, people proved that wrong. But one of the reasons it succeeded, aside from a good business model, a good idea, great execution, is the timing. That company came out right during the height of the recession when people really needed extra money. And that maybe helped people overcome their objection to renting out their own home to a stranger. Same thing with Uber. Uber came out, incredible company, incredible business model, great execution too. But the timing was so perfect for their need to get drivers into the system. Drivers were looking for extra money. It was very, very important. Some of our early successes, CitySearch came out when people needed web pages. GoTo.com, which we announced actually at TED in 1998, was when companies were looking for cost-effective ways to get traffic. We thought the idea was so great, but actually the timing was probably maybe more important. And then some of our failures. We started a company called Z.com. It was an online entertainment company. We were so excited about it. We raised enough money. We had a great business model. We even signed incredibly great Hollywood talent to join the company. But broadband penetration was too low in 1999, 2000. It was too hard to watch video content online. You had to put codecs in your browser and do all this stuff. And the company eventually went out of business in 2003. Just 2 years later, when the codec problem was solved by Adobe Flash, and when broadband penetration crossed 50% in America, YouTube was perfectly timed. Great idea, but unbelievable timing. And in fact, YouTube didn't even have a business model when it first started. It wasn't even certain that that would work out, but that was beautifully, beautifully timed. So what I would say in summary is execution definitely matters a lot. The idea matters a lot, but timing might matter even more. And the best way to really assess timing is to really look whether consumers are really ready for what you have to offer them. And to be really, really honest about it, not be in denial about any results that you see. Because if you have something you love, you want to push it forward. But you have to be very, very honest about that factor on timing. As I said earlier, I think startups can change the world and make the world a better place. I hope some of these insights can maybe help you have a slightly higher success ratio and thus make something great come to the world that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Thank you very much for a great audience.
Click the subscribe button and press the bell icon to never miss a video from Josh Talks.
Okay, let me put that off, and hopefully that's a good warm-up. And let me get to my slides. Okay. There are a couple of references. The first reference is to YouTube. Second reference is a couple of checklists that you can look at. I had just put these in there just in case Thai Kerala wanted to circulate these presentations to you. And I'm a big believer with the Strategyzer list of books. And these are the books. The last book, High Impact Tools for Team, is still not out. I have 3 of the remaining 4 books, which is the business model generation. And actually my call to fame on business models with Chennai, which is where I'm a charter member, started about 12 years ago when I started a business model workshop based on the first book that this group came up with, which is the business model generation. And it's all about business model innovation. So when we talk about product innovation, it's not just the product innovation, the business model innovation is also important. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to show the video, even if you had seen it before by Bill Gross, because he kind of touches on various important things that a startup needs to succeed. So moving on, this is the intro, right? So I have split my session into 4 bits, and to be honest, I want to be pretty quick about 1 and 2 so that we have plenty of time for questions. The case study is just a way of getting into questions, and I talk a little bit about it. But it's always helpful because I don't know how much you are immersed with the business model language. So I would very quickly introduce the language that I'm going to use, because it becomes a common way in which you can discuss business model and discuss innovation. So what's a business model? It tells you how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value, right? So the words to remember: it's not just about creating and delivering value, you also need to capture it. Otherwise, the business model doesn't work. And probably most of you all are familiar with the business model canvas. If you're not, just go to strategyzer.com and you can pick up the canvas, right? So this was the first book that they came up with. The second book was around value proposition, right? Which is taking these 2 boxes, the value proposition box and the customer segment box, right? And the value proposition therefore describes the benefits that the customers can expect from your product and service, right? So, and it's important that we address that. And I would very quickly talk about what is the fit, because if there's no fit, you don't have a successful business. And again, this is what the value proposition canvas looks like. Again, go to strategyzer.com, pick it up, right? I run a workshop for Chennai around business model and value proposition canvas. And if you really want to give it justice, that's a 1-day workshop, right? So we don't have time for that. I just want to introduce you to the concepts today, right? And the question of fit, and often that goes with, do you have a value proposition customer segment fit, right? So if there is, usually the way we build startups is we have a problem, we come up with a solution, right? And we say that's a fit on paper, right? Then you go to the lab, right? So you sort of, build a product, right? You sort of prototype it, and then you take the product to market, right? So if the product is something that the market needs, you have a market fit. But the problem is, with just a market fit, you cannot make money, and therefore you do not have a sustainable business. So when we talk about a fit in the bank, we actually talk about a business model fit. It means that the entire business model must work, right? So if you go back to listen to Bill Gross' video earlier, right, he says sometimes you may not even have a business model when you start, but by the time you have a sustainable business, your business model would have evolved so that you can not just create value, but also deliver and capture value, right? And only when you have captured value have you got a fit in the bank. I'll skip this, right? And the most important person that you are dealing with is obviously the customer, right? So you have achieved fit when your customers get excited about your value proposition, right? And when does that happen? You address their most important jobs, you're alleviating their extreme pains, and you're creating essential gains for them. And you have to remember that your customers are judge, jury, and executioner of your value proposition, right? So, so when we talk about innovation, you need to continually test that innovation with your customers, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense, right? Right? Building the best mousetrap doesn't work if you don't take the mousetrap to market, right? So let me touch on what I would call explore and exploit, right? So this is the 4th book in the series that Strategyzer came out with, right? Right? At the end of the day, when are you successful? You're successful when you have an invincible company, right? You have a company that really gets on with it. So what's an invincible company, right? It's a company that explores the future, right? We're talking about innovation while excelling at exploiting the present, right? So if you have existing products, existing innovation that is able to generate value, then you should continue with it, right? So it's an organization that cultivates innovation and an execution culture. Again, things that you heard in the video today, right? And they need to live together in the same roof so that you have a superior business model, right? Which goes beyond the traditional industry. So when I'm talking about diversification today, I'm not talking about, on the one hand, having a restaurant, and on the other hand, maybe running a transport company. That's not the diversification I'm talking about. I'm talking about diversification where you are in related spaces, right? Because if you look at some of the very successful companies today, it is that diversification that enabled them to survive. And that includes some of the examples that Roshan talked about, when he was introducing the topic, right? And the tool that we use, and I will be talking a lot about these tools. I'll apply this tool to the case study that I'm going to talk about, is the Explore Exploit map, which is what we call the portfolio map. Right? So the business model portfolio is a collection of existing business models, right? It's not just about the product itself, it's entire business model, because you also need to answer questions like, how do you go to market? Do you sell the product? Do you lease the product? Do you make everything yourself? Do you subcontract parts of it? They are all business model questions, and you need to think about all of it to know whether you actually have a business model fit, right? All right, and at the same time, you exploit your existing business model, but you also need new business models in the pipeline that you explore, so that you avoid being disrupted yourself, right? And that's what ensures that the company survives, right? Given that I'm literally addressing probably more of a startup crowd than mature businesses, I will spend most of the time on explore rather than exploit, right? So what's your explore journey? You discover an idea, right? Second, you validate it, right? If you get customer validation, you accelerate. Sometimes along the journey, you have some reality checks and you have to change direction, right? And which is where the word pivot is often used, maybe overused, but it is a way of life for early stage companies all the time. You need to figure out whether you are on the right track. If the customer gives you a different suggestion, then you need to change and readdress, right? So what are the actions? You ideate, you invest, you persevere, you pivot. Sometimes an idea doesn't work, you retire it. Sometimes you can pass the idea to somebody else, you spin out. And transfer literally means that you take it from explore to exploit, right? So it's generating cash, and then you're then exploring other business models that you can eventually exploit so that you become a sustainable business. Now, the question is, why innovate and diversify? First, the how and the why. Right, so this is the business model map that I talk about, the business model canvas. And you should remember, the business model canvas is nothing but an hypothesis. It is your best guess. So by itself, it is just a way to start. The next thing you need to do is you need to test your assumptions with your market, right? So taking an example, you may be figuring out what are the things that you want to test, right? So you may test some of the key activities that you think is part of your hypothesis. And you can't do it sitting on your desk, so you have to go out and listen to your customer. And you come up with a minimum viable product, right? So once you have a minimum viable product, again, right, you find the right model, right? You do a customer discovery, you validate with the customer. If the customer is not happy, you pivot, right? So your discovery process keeps going on and on and on, right? And taking it to the product level, what it means is that you have a minimum viable product, you get customer feedback, you roll it to your next generation MVP, right? And this is the way to do it. And many of y'all will be familiar with the concepts of lean startup. The idea is to, right, it's not wrong to fail, but fail quickly so that you don't waste time and go quickly towards finding the product that the market really wants. And why do all this? This is again something I picked up from Harvard Business Review, right? People think that a lot of these startups are overvalued when they go public. But if you look at their price earnings ratio over time, it's, pretty reasonable, right? And the reason the innovative companies are rewarded and disruptors are rewarded is because they do over time generate a lot more value, right? So there is reward for innovation, right? And innovation comes with your pivoting, your diversification, having new business models regularly coming through the network, right? So now let me talk about the case study, right? So I'm kind of fast over the first bit because it's just to introduce you to the language, right? Now, a case study. This is a company that I am personally involved in. The name of the company is not important. And when you look at the slides, there will be nothing in the slides that suggests specific things about the company, right? Because there are various confidentialities that I need to respect, including people that I worked with. But I'm just happy to share that for the purpose of study today. Now, this is a company that was in the business of building simulators, right? And I will, as I get into the story, I will tell you what are the kind of simulators that they built. And this was a company that started in Chennai, and today it's a Singapore-run company, right? And therefore, you can kind of see how I fit into this because of my shuttle between Chennai and Singapore, right? I'm actually Singaporean, and my link to Chennai is just my wife, and therefore I shuttle between Chennai and Singapore, and therefore my role in that way helped me to help this company get beyond what they could have been if they stayed in Chennai, right? So I think the important thing is this is a company that makes simulators for various purposes, right? And we will talk about what are all the purposes in a moment, right? And I think in this context, I liked these quotes that I kind of picked up while I was reading a couple of books, Jeff Bezos and Amazon, I mean, which is, I think for all intent and purposes, one of the most successful innovations that came out of the dot-com era. So failure and invention are inseparable twins. And again, many of y'all who are familiar with the lean startup concepts will be familiar with these things. And therefore, it's acceptable to take risks, try hard, and fail, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And really, if you want to innovate, if you want to build successful business models, there is really no alternative to taking risks. Okay. So you remember I showed you the canvas of the explore and exploit, right? So let's give each of the 4 quadrants a name, right? Where innovation risk is low, right, which is on the right side, and your expected returns are high, you have what we are calling a rising star, right? If you have high return expectations with high innovation risk, we call it a promising concept, right? The idea is to move that rightwards towards rising star as you bring down the innovation risk. Where risk is low and the returns low, it's a safe play, which is okay, but it's not going to sustain you if you can't move it up. And remember, rising stars eventually need to be exploited, and then you need to jump into the exploit box, right? And when risk is high and returns low, it's a niche play. So let me come to the company that I was talking about, right? So this simulation business, before I got involved with them, I got involved, I think, around 2014. It built a truck driver training simulator, and it worked with Ashok Leyland, and it delivered it in the Indian market, right? And the problem they had was that they never got regular contracts, right? Because I think most of y'all are familiar when eventual payments come from the Indian government, the security of those contracts being received and Ashok Leyland receiving the money and therefore paying this company becomes extremely difficult, right? So, but that's where they started, right? They started with the truck driver training simulator, and that's how they built their first simulator. Then they had various conversations with DRDO, right, which is literally the Indian Army. And they had built a lot of relationships, and they had also identified uh, potential products, services that could support the Indian Army and the DRDO. Again, the issues around dealing with government in India also applies, right? So, so that didn't go very far, but it was an option, right? So I'm talking about diversification here, right? You have a business model for truck driver training. You have a business model to sell products or services to DRDO. And the two things that they specifically talked to me about in 2014, one is what's called dynamic positioning, which is about how you park ships next to an oil rig, right? Because the ships actually have to move sideways to get parked next to an oil rig, but at the same time, make sure that it doesn't knock off the oil rig, right? Right. So they said, well, and that's where the conversation started, because Singapore, as many of y'all will recognize, is a major maritime center, which Chennai is not, right? So the reason that they spoke to me and they said maybe they want to come to Singapore is because there is that opportunity in the marine space. And the top left quadrant, this is a medical device. This is not the medical device that we make. We make a medical device uh, that is a simulator to train orthopedic surgeons, right? So again, before 2015, before they moved to Singapore, they were in conversation with Johnson and Johnson, which was headquartered in, or the Asia Pacific arm was headquartered in Singapore, about developing a simulator that could train surgeons in the use of J&J tools, right, for knee replacement surgery, right? So that was at the conversation stage before 2015, and eventually that took a journey of its own, right? So this was the status of this company before 2015. Then what we did is we re-domiciled the company, right? And you notice in the next chart, the truck driver training is gone, the DRDO is gone, and the Marine is gone, right? So why did the Marine go, right? When we came to Singapore, we started talking to customers in Singapore, in Korea, right? Again, Korea became more accessible out of Singapore. What happened was the marine industry went through a downturn in 2014, 2015. So, right, remember Bill Gross video, if your timing is wrong, it just ain't gonna work, right? So we had to drop it because it wasn't taking us much further. Now, what we succeeded is the device business, because we got $500,000 from Johnson and Johnson. So we developed the knee replacement module, the simulator. And so not only we got the $500,000 from Johnson and Johnson, we also sold 2 units for them. But the problem was it remained a rising star and never jumped into the exploit box, because Johnson and Johnson got into various trouble in India because of the issue around stents. And therefore the entire team in J&J that we were working with left J&J. And therefore there wasn't a owner in J&J to take this product further, even though they had spent $500,000 on us and paid another $150,000 to buy 2 machines, right? Despite that, that kind of failed. So what we did is we pivoted, right? So you think about all the explore activities that have gone on. We actually went out of some businesses, we retired some businesses. So here we pivoted from the device to training orthopedic surgeons, right? So the way we did that is we partnered with National University Hospital, which is the teaching hospital in Singapore, right? Because it's affiliated with National University of Singapore. And we started using these devices to build curriculum to train orthopedic surgeons, right? And not only we did the hip module, the knee module, which we developed for Johnson and Johnson, we have since added the hip module, right? So we've got two of the things. Now, just because we have this doesn't mean that there are other things you don't consider in the pipeline. So we considered various other things, right? We're not just limited to knee and hip. We can do spine, we can do trauma, we can do other things. In fact, we even had approaches from the Gates Foundation who sort of said, can you build a module to train midwifery in Africa, right? So we considered various business models, right? And we decided that we should focus on those that had a better likelihood of success, right? Because as a startup, you have limited resources, right? Resources are not unlimited. Even for big companies, resources are not unlimited, right? And so you can't be spending on too many things. You have to focus, right? So diversification in the context that I'm talking about doesn't mean that you do not focus, right? Focus on things that are more likely to succeed, right? So then what happened, right? With all of this, we moved to where we are today, right? So today, our focus or where we have a product is the knee replacement simulator. And the hip simulator is now being evaluated by National University Hospital of Singapore. And we have other business model questions to think about. Do we sell together with asset management contract? Or do we own these machines and charge pay per use? This is a business model question, right? So the question here is not just about what product and what customer, what business model that you are going to adopt for it is also a question, right? And these are things that you would need to go back to the customer, test the market, and see what it works. Now, as we were working with National University Hospital, we realized that the real reason they were excited about our simulators is because of what uh, doctors do or surgeons do is pre-surgical preparations. And today, all pre-surgical preparations are done on 2 dimension, right? It's done on paper. So they're kind of excited if they can load their patient data and use the simulator to do a 3-dimensional preparation, right? So you could almost practice what your surgery is going to look like before you get to the surgery itself. Now, with these kind of technology, you can actually take it very much further, right? So this is almost like a digital surgery. What in medical language we call assisted surgery, right? So you could have the simulator linked to a surgical device which will drill only as you have planned for in your pre-surgery, right? So the reason this is niche is I think we're still kind of far away. So it's a bit of a dream, but it is a possibility, right? So it's related to what we already do. And I suspect that if we get to there, we're probably a $1 billion corporation. But again, there are all kinds of other options, right? Do we just stick with knee and hip? Do we move into spine? Do we move into trauma? Or do we fit in other non-orthopedic solutions? Because that's also a possibility, right? And look at the flags at the top, right? So while we started in India, became a Singapore domicile company, our focus today is only Asia Pacific because the 2 other markets where we have had conversations is Australia and Japan, right? Now, what is the possibility tomorrow? No reason why this can't be a global business. Over time, the assisted surgery might be getting closer to a rising star, and possibly the training stuff could actually get into the exploit box. And on the devices side, J&J could come back to become a customer. There are all kinds of other players, Stryker, Zimmer, Smith and nephew, all of whom we are having conversations with. We might have taken pre-surgical to Asia Pacific and no reason we can't take it abroad. And the thing is, again, we need to diversify into related areas, right? Which is all these question marks, right? So, there are many things we think about, right? The boxes are too small to tell the story, right? So that's the story, right? So I think I'm exactly at about halftime. So let me open up for questions. And it's time for you to explore.
Thank you very much, Subra. Very insightful, lot of learning. I'm sure young entrepreneurs present attending this session would definitely have a lot of learnings from what you spoke just now. Just to start off the question session, uh, because since I'm associated with young entrepreneurs and startups through Capital Cafe, one question which come to my mind is how are the tools discussed in this session relevant to startups? Can you speak about that?
Yeah. So I think the way you can use the tools is you can use the business model canvas, the value proposition canvas, as well as the explore exploit canvas. So one of the ways in which I have demonstrated using it for a startup is the company that I have been talking about is indeed a startup, right? And one of the ways you can use it is the way I used it, put pictures on, right? And we recommend using post-it tabs because business model is always evolving and changing, right? So really, I think, I have this habit of printing these canvases in large canvases, like an A1 or a A2 kind of size, and have the group, the team discuss as you sort of put pictures on various blocks, right? Not everything needs to be in writing. Some of it could be pictures, but the canvases give you a common language with which your team can communicate, right? So that's really the way to use it if you are a startup.
Great. Okay, one another question which came from the crowd with the listeners: how to develop innovation culture in a startup? Is there any thumb rule to allocate budget for innovation activities?
Okay, right. So some of these studies have been done. Um, a lot of people think that spending money on R&D will give you innovation, but that's not really true. Um, R&D is R&D. How do you make a Ford engine better is R&D. But really, the way you do it is, let me go back to my explore map. You need many, many items in your explore box, right? And the idea is to put in small amounts of money, invest small amounts of resources into multiple ideas that can be tested by diverse teams, right? This is what big companies are doing, right? And the companies that spend that money, which is a little bit different, and an explore budget, which is different from a pure R&D budget, because an explore budget is about exploring the entire business model, right? So the companies that have proven to be sustainable are the companies that spend small amounts in a large number of test business models, right? Business model hypothesis, right? I mean, you can start 250 and you find that out of 250 ideas, maybe 5 succeeds, right? So the challenge if you're a startup is you can't do 250, right? You don't have the money to do it. So you need to get a little bit smarter and sort of just focus in the areas where you have expertise, right? but the diversification, the testing with customers is all important, right? So if you create teams with that culture, then, that's how you create an innovation culture.
Okay. Yeah, probably a question, in addition to the earlier question, supermarket is an example of diversification. So what is not there in supermarkets diversifications? I'm not clear about the question. Anything
Okay,
to
so
add to
let's
that?
look at it this way, right? So if you are a supermarket, what is the threat to a supermarket, right? I think the threat to a supermarket is big basket, right? And what COVID has chosen, right? So now, if you were a supermarket going through a COVID environment, would you stay the same way, or would you pivot and add a online element to your offering, right? So that's probably one of the ways that you should be thinking about it. What works today may not work tomorrow, right? I mean, just taking Roshan's example of Zoom, right? Never before 2020 have I delivered expert witness services on Zoom. Today, the Singapore courts even allow expert testimony through Zoom, right? This is how the world has changed, and the crisis of 2020 has changed the way many things are going to operate in the future, right? So I think the way to think about it is look at alternatives, right? Look at what is in the periphery, right? So if you're familiar with Michael Porter's five forces, right? What are the alternatives that are out there to your particular business model?
Excellent. Another question which come to my mind, see, you mentioned about now product innovation and diversification. Are the tools used by matured companies?
Yeah, it is. And there are various examples like Nestle, Ping An. Actually, if you pick up the book Invincible Company, there are many examples. And they are as I described, right? So you have many ideas sitting in this explore box. And as they mature and get to becoming a rising star and become cash generative, they move to the exploit box, right? And once it moves into the exploit box, you need to accelerate its growth. You need to reap the benefit, knowing that product cycles are limited, right? There will be a time when you need a new product innovation and a new business model innovation because the products will go to maturity and they would die, right? This is a typical S curve that many of you all may be familiar with, right? So if you're a mature company, you will probably have a very busy explore box, and you will also have a very busy exploit box, right? And it's the job of the leadership is how do you manage both, right? You need managers to manage the exploit box, but you need entrepreneurs to manage the explore box, right? And if you think about yourself as a startup, your skills may be in explore, right? What happens when your products mature, right? And you need to be a manager and not an entrepreneur, right? And these are challenges that you will deal with as the startups mature as well.
Insights. Okay, well, another question is when we take business canvas model, how should we calculate the market threats? And are there any precautions we should keep in mind?
Okay, this is about market threats, right?
Ah,
Right. So almost as you build your business model, you're constantly going to ask the question about competitive positioning, right? In fact, as an angel investor and as someone who evaluates multiple business model ideas, and I've done that starting with Tycon Chennai some 8-9 years ago when we ran our pitch fairs, right? And therefore I have 10 or 12 years experience evaluating startups. One of the first questions is what is their competitive positioning, right? I mean, what are the other things in the marketplace? And that is a question as an entrepreneur you have to be asking yourself all the time. So the way to deal with alternatives is there's no substitute for the vigilance on what else is happening in the market. Two is to build defensible business models. Okay, now with products and with deep technology, obviously you need something that you keep secure, right? Taking the example of simulators in our case, all the algorithms are not known, right? We didn't patent it because if anyone can read it and we don't have the money to defend it, then anyone can make the same things, right? So when you keep some of your code secret, then that's one way to do it. If there are specific processes, then you should patent those processes, right? Remember that whenever you patent something, it is published. So you need to make this decision on what you patent and what you keep as a secret sauce, right? So this is the journey that you would go through. And I do think a lot about these because a lot of my investments tends to be in the area of deep technology. Now, when you then come up with e-commerce ideas, it's harder to build defensibility, right? Because we have seen that it's the top one or two that survive and actually go on to become financially sustainable, right? So you do need to keep an eye on the competitive space all the time.
The same person has probably added one more line. When developing a product, should the product be appealing globally? So how to crack the formula to reach the global market? Your
Okay.
thoughts?
Yeah. Taking the context of India, I mean, there are many products. I mean, India is a large market, right, to start with, right? So I think about it differently when I'm in Chennai, and I think differently when I'm in Singapore. Singapore is an extremely small market. So everything I think about in Singapore needs to be global, right? Otherwise, it will never scale, right? Uh, India is interesting because if you can build something really successful, and we can think of the Flipkarts, the big baskets, and all that sort of Paytm, they are largely India plays, but because India is a large market, you can be successful in a market like that. Having said that, my experience with startups that Keiretsu Chennai has funded, many of them were companies that went through incubation with IIT Madras. We found that they became a lot more attractive, sustainable, a lot of very attractive to VCs when they globalized, right? When they were just addressing the India market, they were thought of as a niche play, right? Which is, yeah, you have some expected returns, but you also have innovation risks. But when they moved abroad, and several of them that we invested close to 6 years ago have moved abroad, one to Europe, Middle East, and Southeast Asia, another in the oil and gas space to Houston, Texas. They became extremely valuable companies, right? So compared to the valuation at which we invested, the value of subsequent rounds have increased a lot more, right? So I can speak more for the deep tech space, and I feel that if you're in the deep technology space, your ability to go global is extremely valuable, especially for your subsequent fundraising. Maybe an e-commerce space, a payment solution could be attractive just in an India market, right? So the answer is going to be, it depends on where you are, right? Are you able to address the entire Indian market with you, or you need other markets to make the business sustainable? Roshan, are you on mute?
Okay. Since you are into funding, see, a question which comes to my mind is, see, most VCs expect early stage companies to focus. How then do we justify being diversified at the same time?
Okay. So, uh, when I use the word diversification here, I'm not using it in the context of the old school conglomerate, right? I mean, if you think of Tata Sons, that's really a diversified conglomerate, right? And you can do that when you're large enough, but even there, capital markets often tell you to focus, right? And which is why Tata Sons have got separate listed vehicles, right? So that each of them are focused in their specific area, whether it's coffee with Tetley, or whether it's the automotive, or whether it's TCS. Right. So when I talk about diversification in the context of product innovation, it's kind of the example that I took you through about this simulator business. Right now, if you have built codes for a simulator, it's just an alternative, right? If you have built it for truck driver training, it is a little bit of a move to build it for dynamic positioning for maritime vessels. It's a little bit adjacent to sort of build it for training orthopedic surgeons, right? You're not moving away from the simulator space, right? So when we diversify, and if we didn't have that diversification, can you imagine, right? We would have gone nowhere with Ashok Leyland and the Indian government. We would have gone nowhere with the marine space because, the market just disappeared in 2014-15, right? But having diversified and had a medtech proposition, right? We find that we've got new life, right? We got funding from J&J. And right now we've got a collaboration with National University Hospital, right? So I would think of diversification in that way, right? Diversification to alternate spaces based on your core competence, right? So we're not talking about going beyond and starting something else, right? And in which case it is unfocused, right? So this is focused, but this is focused for survival because not all your ideas will work, right? And sometimes the timing is wrong, right? As Bill Gross says, the timing is wrong. You got to drop something and move to an area where the timing is right, because otherwise, your chances of success really, really drops. You're on mute, Roshan.
Okay. The another question which came up: product updations are changing day by day. If a product is launched in the market, there will be competitor companies which take over the opportunity and dump new products. So there will be an end to one product. What is your opinion in this kind of a situation? What are the suggestions that you have?
It is. I mean, look, product cycles are smaller. But product cycles are smaller in the consumer space, or shorter in a consumer space than perhaps in the business area, right? So if I think about the medical technology space, I would argue that the product cycles are much longer, right? Because the innovation also takes that much longer, right? Really, if you're looking for returns, and I have seen it as an angel investor, right? I think some of my best performing startups are in the deep technology space, but it takes them a long time to get to scale because it's very difficult, right? And when they get to scale, therefore, they have a competitive advantage as long as they're doing the right things about exploring adjacent products, right? Then they are fine. Product cycles tend to be lower in the consumer space. So the more tech is involved, the longer the product cycle tends to be, right? Um, so depending on which market you are, you need to keep that in mind so that you put more items into your explore box so that you have got more things to exploit in time to come, and therefore build, what Strategyzer describes as the Invincible Company. Again, you're on mute, Roshan.
Yes. Okay. One thing which comes to my mind is the story of Waterjet, uh, which got into a similar situation. In fact, they were the first ones to create a machine that could generate water from thin air, and an Israeli company. And they patented it in Israel. But again, this company was formed in 2012. 2013, it was mentioned. It came as a cover story for Time magazine. But what happened was, since their patenting was not very strong, about 15 companies around the world copied their product, and it came out in the market, and including LG from Korea came out with a similar product. But again, what happened was, later on, with better funding, they created a compact machine that could be taken as a backpack. And today, in fact, before launching the product, they patented it in US, which has got the most secured patenting. And that is the machine which is being used by armed forces around the world today. A small backpack type water generating machine with a solar panel that can be used. Today, the company is worth more than 4 billion US dollars. They are supplying to almost all the countries for their armed forces, this particular machine. And it is history that when this young person came to India about a year back, people like Anand Mahindra and Ratan Tata were queuing up to meet this young person to become their manufacturing partner in India. So, innovation is a continuous thing, and again, you need to learn from the past mistakes. Okay. Another question which has come up is, if a startup idea is before time, then what is the strategy that you would advise the startup to do? Over to you.
Yeah. So again, going back to my earlier slide, um, what are your explore actions? If it's before your time, you pivot. Pivot is a very difficult thing to do, but you may not have a choice. You should perhaps retire it or spin it out, right? So, and these are all actions that go on all the time, because I would refer back to a lot that comes out from lean strategy, which is, if you're going to fail, fail quickly, right? Because you have invested less dollars and less time, right? So if it's not going to work, if the timing is not right, if you go out to the market and it's, there are various problems, no point persevering with an idea in the hope that it will eventually turn around, right? Um, I have some experiences with this. Spent 10 years trying building a product in the agri-tech space and building markets in Southeast Asia. And after 10 years, we just had to shut the whole idea, because if it's not going to work, if the customer is not going to, even if you have a market fit, right? Even if you have a market product fit, if it cannot translate into a business model fit, that is, you cannot build a sustainable business with it, you should retire the idea quickly, and that would save you hell of a lot of money and hell of a lot of time, right? So, business is like that, right? I mean, so many fail. So make the decision, if it's not going to work, retire, spin out, right? No point knocking your head against the brick wall that's not going to move.
Excellent thought. Okay, next question. How should we approach the competitors when a product get expected return in the market?
Competition is a way of life. So, one should never shy away from competition, right? The question is, what have you done um, to defend your business, right? To defend your business model. So your defenses for the product itself, maybe patents, secret codes, secret sauce, whatever. Your defense for the business model would be things like partnerships, good collaboration partners. Have you built a customer network that won't move away from you? Right? How much you are integrated with their offering. So those are all the defensible tactics that you can have, right? These are all business model decisions, right? Security of your channel, because if you are fighting just on the basis of price, at some point it doesn't work, right? So you need to answer all the other business model questions, your channel partnerships, your customer relationships, right? Besides the defensibility of the product and the offering itself, right? So it's all aspects of the business model that you have to try and make sure is resistant to challenge. But know in your mind that eventually competition does catch up, right? And that's the way of the world, right? So then it just means that you put more things into the explore box, because if at a time something doesn't work for you anymore, then you should retire the product.
Excellent. Okay. Next question. As a mentor, what are the sectors of business you believe will rise in the future?
Oh, my feeling is this is personal to mentors. For me personally, it tends to be deep tech, and I focus in certain specific areas of deep tech. I really like the medtech space, as you can tell. One of my larger investments in the medtech space. I have personally been disillusioned by the agri-tech space because I had a substantial investment that failed. So I think it's a very difficult question. I think each mentors develop their own biases based on their own experience. So it's, I've done very little in the e-commerce space, even though some e-commerce companies have been extremely successful, right? But it's just a bias of mine not to go that way. I tend to be pretty cautious about fintech, even though I think fintech is the innovation to come, but I still haven't got a grasp on who and why they would succeed, right? Because uh, lots of innovation is going on in that space. I believe in using blockchain to develop fintech solutions, but blockchain by itself cannot do it. So you need to improve that space. So for me, my preference tends to be in the area of deep tech. So it's medtech, to some extent fintech, really industrial tech, partly because industrial tech because of the connection with IIT Madras, right? Because a lot of the solutions that come out of IIT Madras tends to be industrial tech. There have been a couple of consumer tech stuff, even though I'm a little cautious with anything to do with consumer, partly because B2C is a lot more difficult from B2B. Uh, each of their pluses and minuses. Um, so I think I think it's safe to say the biases of the mentors are also important in this case, right? And I'm really driven by my 10 years of experience with startups.
Great. Just to add to what you said, one area definitely healthcare is one sector which is going to see significant change, not very far off into the future. The entire health sector would now change profoundly. That almost everyone in tech space believe that. Probably another space that young entrepreneurs could look at is the industry 4.0. About 9, 10 technologies are going to contribute in that particular space, starting with artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, augmented reality, virtual reality, big data analytics, quantum computing, and cloud computing. See, all these are areas uh, uh, are probably going to explode with industry 4.0 moving in, and I believe that is a space where India has got a bright future, where India can contribute in manufacturing. Unlike China, China can today be considered as the manufacturing capital of the world, but with technology going to come in manufacturing, I believe India has got a great future in becoming a dominant player in Industry 4.0. So all these 9, 10 technologies which are relevant, I'm sure young entrepreneurs could look at now and deepening those technologies to contribute in these areas. So next question is, how difficult is it for a startup to penetrate the market, and suggest us some tips and insights? I think this is a very genuine question which I've heard from many young entrepreneurs. We are light on funds, so how can we penetrate a big market? It's a question which is asked very frequently. Over to you.
Yeah. So, which is, how do you go about it, right? You listen to your customer, you have a minimum viable product, you go take it, discover the customer, make sure the customer validates this, right? You do quick product cycles, lean cycles, right? If it's going to fail, fail quickly, and then develop the next prototype or the next MVP and go test it with the customer, right? I think, winning customers, there is no substitute for this hard work. The hard work of having a MVP, testing it with a customer and coming back, right? So it really helps when your customer is your evangelist, right? So taking my um, simulator example, right, where we have built a simulator to train orthopedic surgeons. And by the way, we are virtual reality, we are 3D, and we are building AI ML into it, right? So I'm familiar with all of those, and clearly, it's not just medtech per se. Medtech comes with other things as well, right? When you build devices. And our evangelist today is a doctor in charge um, of innovation at the hospital, right? So when you have an evangelist, when you get on a call, when a customer tells you, how great you are, and that's the kind of best endorsement that you can get. So you really want to find a customer who is your evangelist, right? And I think there's no substitute for hard work. They don't just fall in your lap. It's a lot of door knocking, demonstrating, responding to what they demand, and that's the only way to get there.
Okay, to add to what you said, now creating an MVP, trying it out with the customers, pivoting, learning lessons from the past, moving forward without carrying all these egos. I think that is the reason why startups have succeeded. And now, where older generation has failed, young entrepreneurs, when they start up at that young age, there is no ego attached to them, and that is one of the primary reason I believe startups have succeeded. Okay, next question is, as per the current economic situation, what would be the best pitch for investors? Uh, does taking government certification and affiliations increase the interest of investors? Genuine question. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, in a place like India, I never think of government certification. I mean, I tend to focus on, can you build customers? Again, a business model question, right? Who are the customer segments? Who are the major players in the customer segments? Can you find a customer who would be your evangelist? So I tend to think of it that way. In fact, several of the startups that I've invested in that matured out of IIT Madras, when they focused on government contracts, they never did them themselves. They partnered with people who knew how to deal with government. Uh, Now, having said that, I spend a bit more time thinking about government in a place like Singapore, right? And partly because I have a lot of personal relationships with, uh, people who have been perm secs, people who have been ministers, people who are still ministers, then it kind of works, right? And for certain solutions where you need a solution that at least needs government's acknowledgement that it is okay, especially if it's fintech, right? And in fintech, the central bank is very concerned about some aspects of it not contrary to their opinion about how they want to manage monetary policy. So I think if you have solutions that do affect government policy, then obviously you need some government endorsement. But in with the companies I've invested in India, I tend to have invested companies that don't need to deal with government as much as possible. It's just difficult, right? It's very difficult to move an elephant. It's just so difficult, right? So what I would rather look at companies that don't have to go there, just easier.
Excellent. In fact, I have repeatedly heard investors speak about anything to do with government. The timeline might not be, there is no timeline that can be stuck to. So generally investors, when we speak about government orders, they are a little worried and asking the same question, would it happen in a timeline? I think it's a big lesson. Okay, next question. For every business, customer segments may differ. What is the best way to create leads or sales for a business?
Okay, so let's go to the value proposition canvas, right? So you want to identify customers, right? Who are the customers who've got the most pain for the pain relievers that you have developed, right? Who are the customers who are looking for gains that your gain creators, right, of your product and service can actually deliver, right? So I think it is therefore important to look at your product and service, right, and be very clear what you can achieve, what you can't do, right? And then you have to profile your customers, right? So at the end of the day, it's the fit that you're looking for, right? So taking my example of a simulator in the health tech space, my question would be, who is the customer that would benefit most from it, right? So you really need to profile it, and you need to profile them in some depth, right? We didn't know until we engaged National University Hospital that they are doing pre-surgical preparations in 2-dimension today, right? And when they saw our 3-dimensional solutions, they said, can you develop something that would enable surgeons to do 3-dimensional prep? Because that's just superior to what they are doing today, right? And could reduce the risk of surgery. Now, therefore, again, it's that hard work of profiling your customers. And it is actually easier, right? And without having built the MVP, right? The simulator that they can try, they wouldn't even have told us this, because they wouldn't even have thought about it, right? It's the same thing, right? And when Apple came out with iPod, were people looking for iPods? No, they weren't, right? And when the product came out, they said, oh, not only can I have an iPod, I can have an iPad, and I can have an iPhone, whatever else, right? So I think that's how it works. You really need a minimum viable. You have to get out to the customer, profile them, and then you find that you get to a solution that the customer is specifically looking for, right? And you need to look quite widely at your customer profile, right? And in our case, we even had to look beyond India to be able to get to a customer who would actually be would evangelize us.
Okay, great, excellent. Okay, we are almost towards the end. See, one last question, which in fact this is from me. Question is this: in fact, I'm part of a small group that organizes an event called Capital Cafe at TiE Kerala, wherein we try to help young entrepreneurs and startups raise capital. And last 3 years we've been doing it. The specific question is this: like from last year, 2019, we shortlisted 20 startups. 4 of them got funded, but there are 16 who have not got funded and who have to reinvent their business model or product or whatever it is. What is your advice to them? Even this year also, we had shortlisted 30 startups. Out of that, about 18 of them are at various stages of discussion with the prospective investors. But about 12, they have not got much leads from the investors, even in spite of having some of the biggest names in the industry in the investor list. So what is your advice to them specifically? Because what I want is I want to share this link to each one of them and ask them to see. So what is your advice as a person who has gone through a lot of this?
Yeah. So, if you have 20 and 4 got funded, I mean, that's a reasonable odd, right? I mean, and that is the challenge of getting funded, right? And it is really, really difficult. I didn't even talk about the struggles we went through over the years to get funding for our simulator business. I mean, and we continue to struggle. And I think that's par for the course for any entrepreneur, right? It's a struggle that you need to gain. You just need to deal with, right? So what are the solutions around funding? I think one is clearly it's a business model question. Is this what the customer wants, right? And if there is some customer traction, then the investors are easier to get. I find that in India, if you are part of an accelerator, my experience in Chennai is Iyer Madras is extremely successful. Other institutions are developing it, and certainly closer to Kerala, I would think of PSG in Coimbatore as pretty successful. I think it really helps if the startups can be part of an accelerator, part of an institution. I think that kind of increases the likelihood of you getting funded. And clearly a lot of, I mean, compared to when I um, first started spending more time in India from about 12 years ago, middle of 2009, I have seen India transform in this 12 years, right? Um, I think getting funded was even more remote 10 years ago. I mean, when we started Pitchfest, my colleagues and I started helping tie Chennai with Pitchfest. I think 8, 9 years ago, funding was like near impossible, because only the VCs were there. The angel network hadn't developed. But the angel networks are a lot more active today than they were. And I think the more competition that comes up, and as Keiretsu Chennai happened, right? Chennai Angels became more active as well, right? And which is really good for the ecosystem, right? So having multiple funding sources really help, right? And I've always felt that if TIE could have played a role on developing the ecosystem, that really helps startups, right? Together with the institutions and accelerators and that sort of thing.
Thank you. See, we already associate with NIT TPI, National NIT Calicut, then Kerala Agriculture University Agribusiness Incubator, TimeMed, which is a healthcare and medtech focused incubator. So we have this association and we are working towards it. We are running out of time. Thank you very much for your valuable time. Your name was referred by Chandu Nair, who constantly helps us in our endeavor in Capital Cafe. Next year, I would like to see you as an investor participating in the pitches. So thank you very much for your valuable time and lot of advice, genuine advice, I'm sure would help these young entrepreneurs. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And all the best wishes to all the startups who have participated today. Thank you.
Thank you.